For 3 weeks, a revolt against COVID-19 restrictions has held elements of the Canadian state, its economy, and residents of its capital city hostage. This rebellion's populist rallying cries have been freedom, liberty, and patriotism. Its participants have called on their fellow Canadians to rise up and take our country back from the liberal tyranny of Justin Trudeau and the mainstream medical establishment. The appeal is clear enough, but just what sort of freedom are we talking about here? And what does it mean to take back a country built on genocide and theft? This crisis hasn't come out of nowhere. Anger at COVID-19 restrictions has been festering for nearly 2 years now. Millions of people are tired of having our lives disrupted and are frustrated that there's still no end in sight. Vaccines, originally promoted as a cure-all solution to the pandemic, have become less effective with each new variant. There's no shortage of blame to go around, of course. Whether you think it rests with anti-vaxxers, Western governments, pharmaceutical patents, the Chinese Communist Party, or a shadowy cabal of globalists meeting in Switzerland to plot a great reset, probably depends on the information that the social media algorithms put in front of you. It's been a combustible situation for some time now. The announcement of a vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers was simply the spark. The gasoline, as usual, came from Alberta. The movement's leadership is made up of homegrown racists and Western secessionists with ties to Canada's oil and gas industry. This isn't their first rodeo. Their previous attempt at organizing a trucker convoy was a flop. Even so, it left them well positioned to exploit the current crisis. On January 14th, this group launched the Freedom Convoy's GoFundMe page. Millions of dollars soon flooded in from the thousands of small business owners who have provided the movement with its material support base and petty bourgeois class character. By the end of the month, the convoy had arrived in Ottawa, where, much to the horror of local residents, it laid siege to the city's downtown. Security and logistics for this sprawling, decentralized occupation have been overseen by former cops and ex-military, including a retired Canadian Forces intelligence officer turned counterterrorism specialist and an RCMP sniper who served in the Prime Minister's personal security detail. The movement has grafted together a broad coalition of supporters and participants, ranging from hardcore anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, and overt white nationalist organizations like Canada First, to the tens of thousands of so-called regular Canadians who have come out to rallies, joined Facebook groups, and felt emboldened to slap "Fuck Trudeau" decals on their Dodge Rams. As anarchists living in this part of the world, it has been unnerving to watch how quickly this movement has spread to our friends, co-workers, and neighbors. It's been perplexing to see how hard people seem willing to fight for their right to refuse medicine, to pretend that the pandemic is over, or that it was never real to begin with. And at the same time, it's been incredibly demoralizing to see the speed with which liberals, so-called progressives, and even self-styled revolutionaries have turned into snitches and cheerleaders for state repression. These are frightening times, particularly for residents of Ottawa, healthcare workers, people with compromised immune systems, Muslims, Jews, queers, visible minorities, and anyone else who is now more likely to be targeted and harassed by mobs pumped up on adrenaline, testosterone, and inflamed nativist sentiment. This situation calls for meaningful solidarity and for a renewed commitment to the struggle against the reactionary forces of this hetero-patriarchal, white supremacist, and ableist society. Yet in their haste to paint the movement and all its participants as fascist, many liberal and anti-fascist commentators have shown that they gravely misunderstand the threat we all face. By focusing so intently on pictures of a single swastika or Confederate flag, they seem to have missed the sea of red and white maple leaves surrounding it. In dismissing the convoy supporters as a homogenous mass of white racists, they have ignored or downplayed the inconvenient existence of Indigenous and racialized supporters, many of whom have their own reasons for distrusting the Canadian state and opposing increased restrictions on colonially imposed borders. Worst of all, in their desperation to make the situation just go away, many have cheered or offered critical support to Trudeau's decision to enact the Emergency Measures Act, a terrible precedent that normalizes the imposition of martial law by expanding the definition of what constitutes a threat to national security. Make no mistake, the so-called Freedom Convoy is a dangerous development. It will have serious implications on the social networks that we struggle within and against. Like the siege of the US Capitol building last year, it represents a new willingness on the part of sections of the far right and their capitalist backers to attack the democratic institutions that stand in the way of their narrow, short-term interests. Our resistance to these movements must not fall into the trap of reinforcing the sanctity of democracy and the authority of the state. But we must also have no illusions about what we're up against. These new movements are not aberrations or imports from another time and place. They are deeply rooted in the settler-colonial societies that they grow out of, and are the result of real contradictions that are becoming more pronounced by the day. As the Canadian state prepares to force tow truck operators to dismantle their occupation in Ottawa, while taking steps to relax the restrictions that brought people out onto the streets, it seems inevitable that the Freedom Convoy will soon draw to a close. But what will happen next remains unclear. Whether COVID is classified as a pandemic or an endemic, there's no reason to assume that it's over. And so if and when a new variant emerges that causes states to reintroduce restrictions, we can expect the next wave of reaction to be much more violent. Let's be ready.